Hello, my name is Ryan Zachos. I'm a licensed real estate broker out of Sarasota, Florida. I started a firm about 3.5 years ago with my father, who's a retired police officer in the area. We're about 15 agents. I was born and raised here, and today I'm going to talk to you about something that I think is really cool, really unique, and with helping a lot of buyers coming into the area, kind of helps them give a picture of how Sarasota was developed, what type of homes, where they're at based on what you're looking for. So I think it's a unique video. I don't think this has really been talked about or done. I like to use an analogy of Sarasota is kind of built like rings of a tree. So if you think about, you cut a tree down, you see those rings of a tree. That's kind of how Sarasota developed based on the decades, starting about 100 years ago. So Sarasota was incorporated, I believe, in 1902, so just over 100 years ago. And it was incorporated with only, I think, 40 or 50 residents here in Sarasota. They started building homes in the early 1900s and continue, obviously, up to today. And there's new construction planned out for a long time. So based on the type of homes, I thought it'd be really unique to kind of show you, give you a map of, hey, this is downtown Sarasota. This is most likely the home you're going to find here, and then work our way out. So I will give you a map here in this video to kind of show you exactly what I'm talking about and how this does correlate with the ring of the tree idea. So homes built in Sarasota between 1900 and 1930 were often developed right around the Sarasota area, right around the downtown Sarasota area. They are typical cottage and bungalow style homes. They are usually wood frame, single story or small 2-story homes. You'll find some colonial homes, Spanish Mediterranean style homes, but typically they're that Florida old school cottage feeling home. These development areas were Laurel Park, which actually right behind me, right in our office, we're right here off of Orange in downtown Sarasota. So Laurel Park is a place where you'll find brand new construction because they've taken these 1920s homes and leveled them because the physical location is wonderful, being only a couple miles to Lido Beach, St. Armand Circle, and walkable to the wonderful restaurants and plays and things like that here in downtown Sarasota. So Laurel Park, Southside Village, and a couple other communities right around downtown Sarasota is really what was developed here between 1900 and 1930s. A couple things I want to talk about in going over each section or decade that these of homes. I want to talk about the architectural style, which we talked about, key developments, what concerns you might have as a buyer in purchasing home during that era, as well as what housing improvements were done from this decade of homes compared to the previous. In 1900 and 1930, the unique thing that was done, it was actually linked, these homes were linked to city water and sewer by 1910, and the first power station in Sarasota was built in 1920 by Florida Power and Light. Most likely you will have above ground electrical, but you will have water and sewer connected to the home, so that's good to know. The next section we're going to talk about is from 1930 to 1950. They actually started expanding out to the Key, and the architectural styles will also be these small single-family bungalow homes, bungalow style homes, but you'll begin to see maybe some more ranch-looking homes. When you think of the old Florida architectural, you think of those ranch homes, and you will start to see that here as we get closer, especially get closer to 1950. They're still often on a crawl space. Like in the early 1900s, they weren't really built on slabs most of the time. They were built on a foundational crawl space. And they are still usually wood frame homes, but you will start seeing some block homes trickle in here before 1950s. Some of the key developments that you'll see are, they actually start expanding out from this downtown region. So they start expanding out to the Keys, so Siesta, Longboat, and as well as going north, they started going north to the Rosemary District, Cherokee Park, and also expanded east of US 41 and Washington Ave, or 301, that comes into downtown Sarasota. So they started to go east, north, and south a little bit, trying to think about that ring. That ring's continuing to expand. Housing improvements we saw from 1930, 1950. We saw better windows. We do see the use of block in some of these homes instead of the wood, which down here with how much moisture and storms and things like that, a block home is going to do a lot better and hold up for a lot more years than a wood framed home. Another thing with wood frame homes to be concerned about in this area is termites. I don't think I've ever sold a home that was a wood frame home built prior to, let's call it 1960s, 1970s, that has not had termite damage at this point. So if it was a wood frame home that's 100 years old especially, most likely you'll have termite damage, and sometimes it's extensive damage. Now jumping to the 1950s and 1960s, this was a big developmental area for Sarasota as Southgate developed. Southgate is still a very desirable community, is just east of Siesta Key. And these were, mid-century ranch-style homes, the architectural style of them. They were incorporating some pitched roofs, so you kind of got away from the, old 8-foot block homes, but which actually did exist through 1970s into the 1980s. But you did start seeing some mid-century homes with pitched roofs and different level floor plans and things like that. So block became more common in the 1950s and 60s. Southgate was being developed, Paver Park, Ringling Park, Sarasota Springs. This area here just continues to expand. This is also kind of an interesting tidbit. I also think that this kind of shows you too what most desirable areas of Sarasota are based on the years they're developed. Obviously, if people were targeting downtown Sarasota, Southgate area, Siesta Key, Lido, these were and still are probably the most desirable areas to be in Sarasota. I think there's this big rush of suburbia building new construction, but I also think there's this urban landfill, this urban development here that is still so intriguing, especially to me. Instead of building 30, 40 miles out away from downtown Sarasota and the beaches, really looking at purchasing some land that is and has been and was valuable, especially back in the day. Some housing improvements that we saw in here in the 50s and 60s, like we talked about, this new urbanism was restored. Southgate was kind of developed as almost like a master plan community back in the 50s and 60s as Lakewood Ranch or Whalen Park was developed or is being developed here today. So it's a lot smaller scale, but a big piece of property that was developed with a community pool and had that urbanism of being able to walk downtown or walk over to the bay. They really, really loved that back in the 1950s and 60s. The housing improvements we saw also was, back in the 20s to 40s and 50s, we saw a lot of cloth wiring, which actually has asbestos. So that's a big issue, as it's almost uninsurable if purchasing a home with this cloth wiring. Obviously we work with some private insurers, things like that. There's ways to get around it, but it is really tough to get insurance with cloth wiring, asbestos. And so they're getting away from that during this era, which is a good thing. Automobiles have become a main source of transportation. Back in the 20s and 30s, it wasn't a main source. They were building detached garages back then. We're now in the 50s and 60s. They're attaching the garages. They're building carports that are being used as a garage essentially. But the housing materials become essentially almost all block during this era, which is the quality of the home is a lot better. You will still find some wood frame homes in this era, but block is being more commonly used. They held up very well. I would have no qualms in purchasing an old block home in Florida, as they were built very well back then. Now jumping to the next decade of the 60s and 70s, we're continuing to expand out like we talk about, that ring of the tree. We're going a little bit further south to Gulfgate. Gulfgate is another kind of master planned community, if you want to call it that, with its own little downtown center. That urbanism that we talked about was the ability to walk to this downtown. Well, obviously, if you can't keep going further away from the city of Sarasota, the downtown Sarasota, they had to create their own little downtown center, and that's kind of what Lakewood Ranch is doing, Whalen Park's doing, Venice did, Brady, as we expand. But the Gulfgate has its own little downtown shop. There's wonderful restaurants, cafes, bakeries, breweries. There's tons of stuff going on down there. That's a great little area, and it's just off of the south bridge of Siesta Key, Stickney Point. So still a wonderful area, small little ranch-style homes, block homes, and these were typical, snowbirds, vacation homes, retirement homes, or even people that were moving here to Sarasota back in the 60s and 70s were building these small little homes. I guess the buyer concerns I'd have for this area were they were still using cast iron pipes, and cast iron pipes, as we know, can last for 150 years or they can last for 50 years. So we have seen some issues in recent years with cast iron pipes starting to corrode, causing some flooding and things like that in homes. So this is something that if you're purchasing a home in this era, you probably want to get the pipe scope so you know exactly what you're working with and dealing with. The housing improvements they were using were, these houses were on slabs. They were using terrazzo floors. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but terrazzo is actually coming back. This a couple decades in between now and then that they were covering it up with wood flooring or carpeting or whatever else, but we now are starting to see this value of why they chose terrazzo floors. It's this mixture of concrete and quartz and natural stone, which keeps the house cool. It's cool to the touch. It's beautiful to look at. So it is coming back, and a lot of these homes are being restored with that terrazzo. The next decade we're going to jump to is the 70s and 80s. These homes were mostly ranch style homes as well, but they started to get maybe a little bit bigger in size. The key developments here are the South Gate was expanded. So like we talked about earlier in the 60s, late 60s, Gulf Gate was starting to be developed, expanded out, went south into Vamo to Nokomis. Now we're starting to see, for the first time, east of where I-75 lies today is starting to be developed. So back in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of these communities, I felt like they were so far out east, like I'm thinking off the top of my head, Colonial Oaks, Hidden Oaks, some of these homes that kind of right around the I-75 corridor directly east of downtown Sarasota. People would be, oh, this is so far from downtown Sarasota, I don't want to live out here, they're building new construction. And that literally is only 5 miles directly east of the water into downtown. From our perspective, looking at it now, it's like this is as close as you can get. This is in the heart of Sarasota. Still some wonderful areas being developed, some wonderful neighborhoods, typically block homes. As you get into the 80s, you start seeing some more vaulted ceilings and things like that. They started using, these are all now typically in the 70s and 80s, all pretty much connected carports or garages. And then once you get into the 80s to 2000s that we're going to jump to now, you'll start seeing 2-car garages that are enclosed with garage doors. You'll definitely see vaulted ceilings. Everything's on slab. Pretty much everything's block. No more cast iron. PVC is being used here in the 80s. So the key developments in the 80s to 2000s are, Palmer Ranch, which they're still developing Palmer Ranch, or still doing new construction of Palmer Ranch. But that's a wonderful area just east of Siesta Key in South Sarasota. These communities in the Palmer Ranch, the first ones that were developed were Prestantia and Turtle Rock, and a couple other older communities that are still beautiful, wonderful communities. Prestantia has a PGA golf course associated with it. Then as we go, you can go east of I-75 to Laurel Oaks. We talked about Colonial Oaks and The Oaks, which is in South Sarasota as well. Gulf Gate East, Bent Tree, which is east of I-75. So there's tons of communities that were developed from the 80s to 2000s, all which I would not hesitate to purchase in. These homes, for the most part, have updated electrical and plumbing. There might be some things that are of concern, when they built these homes. Obviously, the codes for electrical, the codes for roofing have changed dramatically, especially with the storms. So you might have an older roof, but as they replace these roofs, they are bringing them up to code. One thing that you'll see probably in these homes are double tap breakers or no GFCI outlets. So those are things that you might want to update when purchasing a home to make sure that your electrical is up to code. And then another thing to check on is the roof as well. So as we get into the 2000s, you see kind of the current homes and how they sit and what they look like. That they might be outdated, in the early 2000s with plant shelves and not as much of an open concept. But as we get closer to today, you can look at the model homes online for these builders and you can kind of get a look and feel of what these homes are like. Key developments here in the 2000s is, as Sarasota's continued to develop out, are Lakewood Ranch, Palmer Ranch, Welland Park, the different areas down in East Venice, South Venice are all being developed here in Sarasota County. It's kind of just pushed out and out on, like I said, I'll show you this map so you can get a feel for what that look and feels like. Some buyer concerns are the lack of architectural differentiation. I know that's a big thing with buyers. Some buyers are like, hey, I want to be in a community. I don't mind being on top of my neighbor. I want to have amenities. I want to have that resort style pool, the fitness center, the clubhouse, a restaurant maybe even, or a nice golf course, whatever that may be. And there's some buyers who are like, hey, I don't want that. I want to have that architectural difference. I want to have a Spanish style home next to a colonial style home that has great appeal, maybe a bigger yard. A lot of these homes that were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s we're on a quarter acre or a third of an acre or even a half an acre, and you will not find that in new construction. Typically, if it's a Lakewood Ranch community, they're all on, you know, a tenth of an acre if you're lucky. So that's a buyer concern. If you want to talk about that with smaller lots, you're paying a premium. A lot of these communities do have CDDs and HOAs, so just be aware of that. But there are a lot of improvements that have been made to these homes. They often have either hurricane shutters or impact glass. All the electrical, plumbing, and everything to code is going to be up to date, roof, all that. So there's definitely the pros and cons. You can kind of figure out what makes sense for you. But I did want to talk to you a little bit about how Sarasota was developed, the types of homes during those decades, where they lie physically on a map. So that way you can kind of determine when to saying like, hey, I want definitely a 70s or 80s type home because I want the block home, or hey, I don't care if it's wood framed, I just want the old historical feel, or I want new construction. You know kind of where you'll be looking in relation to downtown Sarasota and the beaches. I hope this helps. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks.